Right. So now we're looking at 7.3, which is dealing with the costs in the short run. So we looked at production in the short run. Now we're looking at costs in the short run. And so before we looked at the firm's total costs depend upon the quantities of inputs that the firm uses to produce its output and the cost of those inputs to the firm. The firm's production function tells us how much output the firm will produce with a given amount of outputs, or given amount of inputs, excuse me. However, if we think about this backwards, it tells us how many inputs the firm needs in order to produce a given quantity of output. This is the first thing we need in order to determine the total cost. And so remember again that for each area of production, which is an input, there's an associated factor payment. Factor payments are what the firm would pay for the use of the factors of production, aka costs for the firm's from the firm's perspective. So again, raw material prices, rent, wages and salaries, interest and dividends, and profit. Okay, so we now have all the information necessary in order to determine the firm's cost. And we can do this based upon the different levels of production. We have the variable cost, which is the cost of the variable outputs, which are labor. And then we have fixed cost, which include costs for fixed inputs like rent. And that is the expenditure that the firm has to make before production can start. And it doesn't change in the short run. And it doesn't change regardless of the level of activity. And then the total cost is the sum of the fixed and variable cost of production. And so cost, the average total cost, or the ATC, would be the total cost divided by the quantity of output produced. And then the marginal cost, or the MC, would be the additional cost of producing just one additional unit of output. So that would be the change in total cost over the change in quantity of output. And then the average variable cost is the variable cost divided by the total, by the quantity of output. We see here that so how output affects total cost. So we see that if we had zero production, we would still have a fixed cost of $160. That'd be like for the rent, for other things. Regardless of that, even if we didn't produce anything, we would still have the fixed cost. Then we see here that as our production increases, our variable costs get added to the fixed cost, and then so the total cost then is the sum of the two. So that would include things such as our materials, cost of labor, so on and so forth. Okay. So we see here that our cost curves, we see that the average total cost, or the ATC curve, that is typically shown as a U shape. And then our average variable cost, or AVC, lies below the average total cost curve and is a U shape and upwardly sloping. And our marginal cost curve, it gradually is upward sloping. So we see here that the average profit, or the profit margin, is the price minus the average cost. So if the market price is greater than the average cost, then we know that the average profit would be positive. If the price is less than the average cost, then the cost would be negative. And that makes sense. If the price is not enough to cover the costs, then obviously we're going to be in the negative. We'll be at a loss. And the book, in the chapter, if you read, it goes into a little bit more detail about that. And there's these sections that I'll clear it up that explain that in more detail.